Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Bruised Not Broken, Life with Glanzmann Thrombasthenia. I am Taylor, your host, and Peter Zdziarski is our producer.
Hey guys.
He was on last month, so you heard a little bit more about him. And we actually have his mom, Missy, with us today. She is actually going to co-host because we have a very special guest. Our guest is Jessica, and I'm going to let her introduce herself and just kind of tell you a little bit about her as a person.
I appreciate you guys bringing me to be on this. This is amazing, and I'm happy to be able to chat about GT today. My name is Jessica Vera-Kelly. I live in Windsor, Ontario with my husband, and my daughter Mia is going to be 2.5 in a few weeks, and she's diagnosed with Glanzmann Thrombasthenia. Locally, I work as a crisis worker, and on my off time, you can find me watching some reality TV.
Mia is one of our youngest people in the community. And then we have Peter, who is in his 30s. So Missy has a really cool outlook because it's been such a long time between the past 29 years. Medically, things have advanced. GT is a little bit more aware. So things have changed. And so we really just thought that having Missy on to kind of compare what it was like with Peter kind of growing up and then what the protocol is these days, too.
I'm happy to be here.
Mia is 2.5. How did y'all come to a diagnosis?
When Mia was born, from the base of her neck to above like her bum, she had a petechia or pinpoint bruising all over her back. Now, she was overdue and I was in labor for 17 hours, but she couldn't get into the birth canal. So they had presumed it was just related to kind of that type of trauma. In October, there was an incident where she had her hand in her mouth and she accidentally kind of cut her gum a little bit and she bled for close to 4 hours. So that was our kind of like trigger point to, okay, we're going to make another appointment because that doesn't seem right. So from there, we made an appointment with a doctor and she had suggested some follow-up testing. Everything again came back fine. So she referred us to a pediatrician. The pediatrician at first suspected that it was von Willebrand, which I know within the GT community is a common, first suspected diagnosis. And then we were referred to another pediatrician. And once her result came back that her von Willebrand was fine, that's not what the diagnosis was. He suspected that it may be a platelet function disorder. So locally here in Windsor where we live, we don't have the ability to test for that. So the closest kind of area is in London, which is about 2 hours away from where we live. So we were referred to the bleeding disorders program there. And thankfully, we're able to get in pretty quickly. And on December 22nd, she went up, got blood drawn. At that time, because she was 4.5 months, they didn't want to test for all of the platelet function because it requires a lot of vials of blood. And she was already a difficult poke. So they really only tested for the two most rare and severe ones, including GT. They very promptly knew that it was, given that she's type 1 and there was just no evidence of any glycoprotein in the blood sample that they took.
What was that phone call like?
So I just remember grabbing a random piece of paper and just trying to jot down, everything that he was saying. And bless his heart, we love our hematologist and he's great. But so he was trying to be as, layperson terms as possible. But I'm like, I don't even know what I'm writing. If that's the correct spelling, I remember just trying to absorb what he was saying. And he kind of said, we'll set up a phone consultation in a few weeks. We'll send you some information about it in the meantime. Because it was in the midst of COVID, we couldn't meet with them in person. And we were just going into another lockdown mode where all outpatient services were being closed. So we got in actually just right at the end of that. Had we had to wait another week for her to get her blood test, it could have been several months before we knew her diagnosis.
I completely forgot that the other layer of this thing, that the pandemic was on this too.
We were just entering into 2021 at that point in time. And so I remember hanging up the phone. And my husband was actually on his way just naturally home for lunch from work. And I was just first stunned. Mia's sitting over there playing on her play mat. And I just looked at her and I just started bawling because I'm like, what just happened? Like our world was just rocked. And then I immediately hopped on Google because that's how I am and was like, I got to find out everything there is to know about this.
What was that Google search like?
Crazy. To be really blunt and honest, the first thing which my mind jumped like eons, I mean, at the time she's 4.5 months, was, oh my goodness, is she ever going to be able to be pregnant and have a baby? Is that ever going to be an option for her? That's literally where I went, having a baby girl.
That's a pretty normal reaction. My own mom kind of had a very similar reaction to that. She did the same thing where it was like, okay, what's puberty going to look like?
All of a sudden, I'm like, it's a 4.5-month-old, right? I jumped to like, what's kind of the future going to look like? Because, I kind of chuckled when he was like, well, she can't play competitive sports. That one wasn't as hard of a blow. It was just more of what's life going to be like for her and how are we going to manage it? And from the get-go, it was like, I really wanted her to lead as normal of a life as we possibly could.
Now, when she first got her diagnosis, what was kind of the plan? What was your hematologist plan? Did he want her to come back in? What did he y'all to kind of look or just plan in general?
So we were quite immediately mailed a Factor First card. Basically, it's a wallet card that you carry with you, and it has kind of the treatment plan broken down. So the diagnosis, what to do for a mild, moderate, severe bleed. So for Mia's plan, and this part still remains true, anytime we present to the ER for a moderate or above bleed, she needs her, here in Canada, it's called niastase. I know a lot of people will know it as Novo 7, but she needs that every 2 hours for at least a minimum of 3 doses. And then we reassess at that time whether we require admission or additional doses, or if we're able to have stabilized the bleed.
So with her plan, even from day one after her diagnosis, it was, okay, when she has a bleed, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to administer this medication.
She was also at that time tranexamic acid that we would have a prescription of at home. And that was for if she was having kind of more of a mild bleed that didn't require us to attend ER. So our guideline for that was if she has kind of some minor bleeding from typically like the mouth or nose area, that we could administer that mixed with some liquids. And then if within 30 minutes things didn't stabilize or slow, then we would call the on-call pediatric hematologist in London and consult with them directly to see, is this something that we need to pursue attending ER for, or can we continue to monitor from home, and, what should we be looking for?
The diagnosis of GT is huge. I mean, it's a very scary diagnosis because of the severity behind it. And then you hear that it's long, it's genetic, it's passed down, it's so rare, and all of this. There's basically everything that you hear about it as it gets added on. You're like, oh my gosh, okay, this is going to be a lot. So Mia was 4.5 months when she was diagnosed. You've got a brand new baby. Did you have a good support system, family, friends? What was that like?
We are so, so grateful and continue to be very, very grateful for the support system we have. We have amazing family supports, friends, over time, even just community of strangers who have, reached out and heard of Mia's condition and helped to raise awareness or help our family in various ways. Like, we've been definitely blessed in that regard.
I love hearing about like the community itself getting together too. Now, you obviously found us. When did you find our community?
And so Mia had just gotten diagnosed, and I was talking to my cousin, and she was saying it would be so cool if is there a support group or something out there? And I'm like, I don't know. This thing's 1 in a million, Mandy. I doubt it. And she's like, well, did you look on Facebook? And I swear to God, I never would have typed it in a search bar had she not kind of mentioned it to you. And lo and behold, I found you, lovely guy. And I was like, wow, it does exist. And it's been obviously amazing since then. It's so nice to be able to talk to people who have gone through it and all those different experiences. And across the world. And Mia's bleeding disorder team, they're super invested and excited about you guys. I talk about you often and reference you guys. And because they're so great, they often ask like, hey, has anybody in the group mentioned something outside of the box about this?
That's amazing that you have a team like that. You found us in like the spring of 21, I think.
Yeah, I think it was probably around the first time she was admitted.
Well, I know for a fact that you stood out to me, and I know that you stood out to Missy as well, because just immediately, like as soon as you joined the group, you introduced yourself, you gave back as well. You stood out from the very beginning. It takes a ton of strength. And I think that's one of the things that really stood out to us was your passion. I remember Missy being like, hey, have you heard about this little girl, Mia? Then Mia had on Rare Disease Day this amazing onesie, and we love that so much. Our logo is something that Peter himself designed. So I've got probably 20 articles of clothing with the logo on it. It stands out, and it shows that by example, you're showing that you can be an advocate. Did you just say, you know what? No, I'm going to be what she needs. And what drives that?
Mia drives that for sure. She's my world. And I think when she got the diagnosis, I was just trying to process it. And in a way to try to, I guess, in some way gain control, I just invested in, okay, I need to be as educated as possible about everything related to this condition because it is so rare and because she is so young and I will have to be her voice for quite a period of time and be the one to advocate for her should things not go the way they need to go. So I felt empowered by just knowing more. I remember even in that follow-up meeting with her team a few weeks later, I had questions about HLA matched platelets and this, and they're like, we've never had a parent to like come in with these questions. I need all the information now and I need to know. And when you're a parent, that's the one thing you want to do. You want to take your child's pain away. You want to fix whatever you can for them and take that on yourself. And I knew with this condition, I can't directly do that, but I can gain the education, understand it better, learn how it's going to impact her and what's best for her as we navigate it. And that comes through experience as well. But that's kind of what I took. The other part is my husband and I were just very dedicated to, again, normalizing things for her as much as possible. I never wanted it to seem like a burden or a negative thing that she is a person who is diagnosed with GT. I wanted it to be like an empowering thing for her, a positive where it could be, and find a balance for her to participate in regular life because it's definitely possible. It's just sometimes there's exceptions of things that she can or can't do. And again, that's for safety. It's not for hindering her, but there's just certain things. But that's honestly what has made Mia Mia. She is, as many describe her, a big personality and a little body.
Now, you are still with the same hematologist that diagnosed her, correct?
Absolutely, yes. And he's young and we hope he never retires.
I mean, just from some things that you told me in the past when we've spoken while Mia has a bleed or anything, they sound amazing. They seem to kind of respect what you have to say. They work with you. Everything kind of goes by you first. Okay, what's your opinion on this? How does that feel, I guess, like to be heard?
Yeah, it's so nice. And I know, unfortunately, like I've seen throughout the group, obviously everybody has different experiences. And sometimes, depending on the area that you're living in or whatever the circumstances, you are set up with a team that maybe you don't feel is adequately dealing with the concerns at bay. And we've been so lucky that they've always just been very, very responsive, knowledgeable, but also supportive. And we've always felt at an even playing field. We've never felt like I have utmost respect and trust in Mia's team. And I go to them for that when needed, of course. And I trust their direction, but it's vice versa. We both feel that way. The other piece to her team that I appreciate very much is when they do come to check in, which they go above and beyond, but they check in not only on Mia, but myself and my husband and to see how we're doing. And they genuinely care about us as a family. We have a lot of correspondence through email, phone, in person, and they've really gone the extra mile for Mia. Her hematologist is constantly in consultation with hematologists across the world, literally speaking to people in Sweden, attending conferences because Mia's one of his only patients who has the condition. And so he really took the time to educate himself and be there and know what to do as well. And he's learning and they're very humble and very caring. And you don't always get that.
I mean, you work in the medical field, so, you see doctors every day. They're not on this pedestal with you. They're just normal people. But growing up, physician's child and everything, like you see it as like doctors are people too type thing.
Absolutely.
I have always gone to doctors who either knew me, knew my sister, knew my parents or whatever, were friends of the family because they have that personal connection. They care about you. Well, then you get into the community and stuff and you meet people who they're like, well, my hematologist doesn't listen to me. And I just want to let them know, like, hey, you want to find a doctor who cares and who connects and who is invested in you because it is a service. You're paying that service. If you don't like your hematologist, then let's find you a different hematologist.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard too, though, because it's like you want a second opinion and it's not always readily available. Because I know even just we're already going 2 hours away to receive this specific service. And for pediatric, like that's who you have. If we didn't like them, we would have had to then go another 2 hours away, like 4 hours away to Toronto and hope that they would accept a referral if we wanted a second opinion or something like that. So it's hard when sometimes a selection is limited as well.
There's very few hematologists that I know of or hematology teams that I know of who go above and beyond. Yes. And I know that Peters was one of them that I know of. There's a team out in California that I know of, and Julia's team when she was younger was the same way. But other than that, we just don't really hear a whole lot about it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes you're obviously the opposite of just, I'm not quite feeling heard, or I don't feel like they're paying enough attention to my concerns or answering my questions. Because again, it's a complex condition and it's rare, and you can do research till you're blue in the face. But again, it's a lot of stuff. I feel like all at once I became like a hematologist, a geneticist, and I'm just trying to be a new mom.
Well, and your hematology team is kind of learning along with y'all too, because again, it's something that there's so little literature on that, okay, well, they're now taking notes for if they ever have another GT patient, you know?
Yeah, they're phenomenal. And the tough part, and it's good, but we learn as we go because at least in our experience, like every person's experience with GT is so individualized as well, right?
Yes.
Just because you can have everybody be, type 1 category, but it doesn't mean that you're on the same trajectory, have the same experiences, hospitalizations, level of bleeds, type of bleeds. So they're taking notes, but it's also where, like he said from the get-go, like we're learning from Mia each time. This is what she tends to respond to. And then that can shift too over time as she grows. And then we just continue to learn and grow with her.
Well, so are they preparing, because you're right in the thralls of the not fun years. And now you're she's 2.5, really getting into that age of nosebleeds or gum bleeds. What is the plan now with nosebleeds? She's too small for you really to be able to pack a nosebleed. What exactly are y'all doing now for a nosebleed?
Yeah, so it's always ever changing. Mia's primary has always been nosebleeds. She's a professional in the nosebleed sector, and it's gotten more challenging. She's very intelligent and insightful in terms of, because of her hospitalizations, and us trying to educate her the best we can for her age about her condition and things like that. She does know nosebleeds. She can identify if there's a clot in there. She can also tell us what her IV, now she has a port, but when she got IV medication, what it was for to help her nosebleeds. But she's not quite at the age where we can explain to her, listen, if you let mommy apply some pressure to your nose, it'll help a little bit. Or if you just relax and sit here and not run around the room while you're bleeding, it'll be helpful. So we're in that kind of range. Our most recent admission was because unfortunately she had a bleed the week before. It was healing. She had some crest up in there. And so, of course, she shoved her index finger in her nose because it was itchy. And that's natural. But then it caused a bleed, right? So we're in that tough period right now with her. But she has had quite a few bouts of Surgiflow. I don't know if that's a common term amongst it, but essentially it's kind of like the ENT comes to just expands in there to block the nostril. So they did do that most recently at her last admission. She tends to sneeze it out, unfortunately, but we do try it.
You're going to hate me saying this. They're not putting it far enough in.
And that's
that sounds awful. I'll have to show you a picture sometime of Julia because she does her own nose packing now. Before it was the same thing. So we did not have Novo 7 or, Niastace. It was not approved. Well, it was not used. So that was their, they do train examic. And Missy, correct me if I'm wrong, y'all were kind of the same way, where it was the packing that they used, first off, always the one that disintegrates or dissolves over time, having to fold them down, it would bruise underneath. That's how high up.
Peter was put into a papoose. I don't know if they still use a papoose in the ER for young ones.
They've burritoed her in multiple blankets. I have both my legs wrapped around her. I'm wrapped around, multiple nurses holding her, and she fights it because it's uncomfortable.
Now, are they using a Surgiflow dissolvable? Is it supposed to dissolve over time?
Yes. It doesn't have to be something that's removed physically. She's only ever gotten the Surgiflow in terms of packing, so to speak.
Have they tried where you do a quick Afrin or a quick epinephrine and then they pack it afterward?
No, they have not.
So I'm going to recommend this. And the only reason why, the thing that terrifies me and terrifies Missy and terrifies Peter and terrifies Dr. Wilcox is the repeated ongoing use of recombinant factor 7A.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know the long-term effects.
Right. And Mia's had, I will tell you right now, well over 300 doses. We have an app that we track.
You're in the medical field, so the more you use a medicine, the more likely that the efficacy is going to not
Sure.
as much. And this is just kind of how my generation, how Missy learned and everything was, because you just didn't have that option, right? So that's where we're okay, pack it. You're also getting into that age now where she's getting a little bit older. And so even if you're doing that medication, it only lasts for however long you're administering it. And in the nose, like she's at that age where she's running around, she's playing or whatever, any type of clot that she could have potentially built while she was on that medicine.
Well, that's what we joke about. She always has her phases of the admission because it's like, okay,
Yeah.
we're bracing for the sneeze. And then, bracing for the dislodge of the surge of flow.
So this last one was a posterior nosebleed. And you said that before when they went in, it's been pretty much the same bleed.
I suspect that it is. I mean, it may be from different locations, but she has been consistently bleeding since about June of last year. We're at 21 admissions and 12 of those have been in since July.
When they went in and they didn't see anything, I mean, I can say, hopefully, I know that this is the case with with some doctors, at least they've gone in once now. So hopefully it won't be as difficult to get them to go in again. Now, Missy, with Peter, when he had nosebleeds and everything at that age, again, Novo 7 wasn't FDA approved. I don't even think, does it exist yet?
That's a good question. I think we'd have to do some research to figure.
Okay.
To clarify, we were prescribed Amicar 30 years ago. I think that's what we had in the US at that point. I don't think we had tranexamic acid. Amicar was the medication that caused the stomach upset and the queasiness. So you're trying to slow down a bleed and create a clot, and he's throwing up because he was queasy with it. It just didn't seem to make sense. We were able to have tranexamic acid prepared by a compound pharmacy. And we did try that, but that took a lot of creative figuring out to get that made even. But our go-to when he had a gusher, we would start with slowing it down with pressure. So, we would have to convince him to sit still, which wasn't easy. But back then we had Barney. I don't know if anybody remembers Barney. Getting him, preoccupied with something else while we were doing it. And he was pretty patient because it was unpleasant to take Amicar and have a nosebleed. And he wanted it to stop just as much as we did. We would try pressure, and then as soon as we got it slowed down, we would use Afrin, which constricts the vessels to hopefully close things off a little bit. And we would start on Amicar and kind of wait it out. And it would be a gusher if it continued after pressure and Amicar and having him eat a popsicle and keeping him quiet. Then we would head off to the ER. And it would mean getting out the backboard with the wraps. It was called a papoose at that time. So he would cry and he would scream, which would cause a petechiae around his eyes. And they would pack it and we would leave. And back then they didn't start out with the Surgicel and stuff that would dissolve. They used like a long strip of gauze that was coated in like a bacitracin. So it would go up easy and come out very easy. It was lubricated. And they would leave it in probably 48 hours, and they would put him on an antibiotic because leaving a packing in that long, there's a chance of a sinus infection of causing you some bacteria in there. And then we would take it out a few days later and cross our fingers and hope for the best and go from there. So we didn't have the Nova 7. There wasn't that option.
So it says for the prevention of bleeding and surgical interventions or invasive procedures in patients with hemophilia.
I think that was when it was starting to be like mainly off-label use in GT because it was off-label use for years. And that's one of the reasons why it was so difficult for people to get their hands on for a really long time.
When did your mom start the support group? What year?
The foundation was started in 2001.
I'm trying to remember, being on that message board that was part of the website at the time. I'm trying to think back. It's too bad we can't access that because I'd love to look back and see when we first heard of Novo 7. Maybe it was mentioned on that board and who the first GT patient was that used it.
All I remember is that it was something that my dad was familiar with because it's used in burn patients a lot. So I think it was something that he had kind of heard about pretty early on. And then it kind of took off from there where it was brought up more and more within the group. Again, because it was something that nobody knew of. I always find it funny because I say our generation or whatever, but it that initial smaller group that was connected was very wary about using it because the last thing that everybody had talked about was use platelets, use platelets, use platelets. But we had older people within the group who were like, absolutely not. No, no platelets at all, because we have all of these antibodies. And now it takes us 72 hours to get platelets if we need them. So then now when it was like, okay, well, we've got this great medicine that works and all of this, everybody's kind of going in with that same mindset where it's like, okay, hold on. Like, how long does it work for us?
So we should clarify it. It
like
took 72 hours to get platelets because they had to be matched.
I will say, just in comparison, given that, so Mia's had platelets twice now, for the first time kind of in the last month, only because she had her port put in. So that was HLA match. But here in Canada, like that took over 3 weeks.
See, that's scary to me.
And if it was an emergent situation, I think that they probably may have been able to get it quicker, but it definitely wouldn't have been that quick. I'll tell you that. So, and then she eventually last admission had to have unmatched platelets just because of her drop, but we've avoided it this long. There's been times where we were like, ready. Like I've actually signed consent, and then they finally like, you know what? Okay, it's slowing. We're just going to hold off. Did make it that far, and they do plan to do a blood test just to make sure that she didn't develop the antibodies.
Has she ever had filtered red cells instead of?
She, like in terms of a blood transfusion? Yes, she's had now required 3 blood transfusions.
Because that's something, I don't know. I try not to put this out there all the time and everything just because it's my sister and she's so private. She has never, ever had a platelet transfusion. When I tell you that my mom was anti-platelets, like there was absolutely no questioning her stance. Whereas like now it's kind of like, okay, yes, platelets bad, but at the same time, like if that's your go-to, I never want anybody to hesitate. We're like, Mia got down to 4.8.
And I will say that like her team has always held the stance, like, we know that right now, if we give her platelets, things will be stabilized. There's been times where they're like, but we're just going to keep you in hospital for a few more days. And if we get to that point, we get to that point. So they've been very, very conservative. When her hematologist came in and was like, I think we got to throw on the towel. I hate to do it because we tried to avoid so much of everything, but he knew it was just kind of required.
Which is great because I think, Missy, y'all didn't really have platelets thrown at you too much, did you?
I think we did. I think that's all we had. Platelets were never suggested for nosebleeds. I should clarify. When Peter was learning how to walk, he fell and he hit his head. And they monitored it very closely for a couple of days. They draw a little circle around it with the Sharpie marker and watch it expand and expand. And it got to a point where it was like, okay, we need to do some platelets. They were HLA matched, and he once needed them for a GI bleed when he was a little kiddo. And then also he had them for an elbow surgery and when he had his wisdom teeth removed. But each time they were HLA matched. So we were lucky enough to have a hematologist that was very aware in us. And also for the surgeries, they were scheduled, so they had time to get them. It wasn't an emergency situation, but he's never had Novosev.
If Julia's had it, I think she's maybe had it once or twice. Insurance companies here in the US are starting to, and we just actually just saw this personally, but Novosev now, the on-label use for Novosev or GT is after platelets and if platelets don't work. So just recently, my sister is at that age where she's making her medical decisions on her own and everything. And so I remember she had asked for some Novosev. She'd been having a really bad posterior nosebleed. And so she was in the emergency room. They called her hematologist, told him that, hey, she wants to try some Novosev. And he goes, no. And she was like, okay. And he's like, well, insurance won't approve it right now unless she has platelets first. It was like one of those kind of where we were kind of shocked. We were like, okay, all right. And she's like, well, I guess I'll be fine.
And that's where it's so crazy, the difference between like countries, right? Like, but we have at any time, like any given time, we need 12 doses. We keep at home.
There are people here who do the same exact thing. And I will say, like, it used to get approved very easily. We're just kind of starting to see where it's not being approved quite as easily. But I also remember where it used to be like, oh, who has Novosev? Can you send me some Novosev? It was one of those things where people would have it at home because you could also potentially where like the hospital wouldn't be able to, or the hospital pharmacy wouldn't be able to.
The hospital pharmacy didn't stock it. I mean, if you're going to a small hospital.
I am glad that we have it now because it does help with one of the things that Missy kind of brought up. the GI bleeds. So Mia hasn't had a problem with this yet, has she?
Knock on wood, she's had one incident where we went to ER because she fell and her bottom teeth punctured kind of the internal part of her mouth. But aside from that, she has not had any other, major bleeds or anything like that.
Missy, I want you to talk us through the GI bleed because I know Peter had a bad GI bleed. Julia had a bad GI bleed. I'm pretty sure Emily had a bad GI bleed, before they were sick. I think that it's something that you get so used to looking out for, like a nosebleed or a gum bleed or something. Any younger parents or parents of younger kids and everything, I just kind of want you to go through like what to look for with that, because those are the bleeds that can get scary fast.
Well, in Peter's case, I don't know that we ever proved it was exactly a GI bleed because he presented by throwing up blood. There wasn't like the dark colored stool for a couple of days. He just came into our room one night and threw up blood all over the place. And we panicked and we bring him to the emergency room, which is a small local emergency room, and his levels were way low. I blocked that all out. I don't remember what it was, but we had to be, rushed by ambulance to a bigger hospital. And they gave him the platelets and he had to stay a few days, but they never really determined if it was a posterior nosebleed. So it wasn't coming out the front. He was swallowing it. And that could have been why he was throwing up blood, or if it was a GI bleed. They did put him under very briefly to look in his nose. We had a really good pediatric ENT who put him under and looked in his nose and said, well, there's no active bleeding right now, but I cannot say positively that it wasn't before. So that was our experience with the GI bleed. We just really didn't know. I think the doctors wrote it up as a GI bleed and insurance paid for it as a GI bleed, but we were never 100% sure.
Yeah. With ours, I think Julia was like maybe 5 and definitely around that age. But I do remember it was kind of similar where she threw up blood. They kind of kept an eye on her. She didn't throw up blood again. Over the next couple of days, they really started to see she got really sluggish, really lethargic and everything, just doing like the simple checks of like within the eyelid, looking at their capillary response on the fingers and everything. And finally, they were like, okay, well, we need to take her in. We think something's going on internally that we just don't know about. And so when they did get her in and everything, I want to say that her hemoglobin was between a 4 and a 5. That is the only time that my parents have ever considered platelets, like just in that moment, like, hey, we're going to do this. And it was one of those things where they were going to do the HLA match and they couldn't get them immediately. So what they were doing at the hospital and everything with the red cells and all of that happened to work, and they were able to get her hemoglobin up. And so they decided against using the platelets when they came in. But that is something that, again, like with little kids, it's hard because they don't necessarily know what they're feeling. They don't know like, hey, I could possibly have a bleed, and you're new to this too. You seem to have a very good grasp of Mia as a person.
She's still a toddler, but she will tell me like, mommy, blood's going down my throat or my nose is bleeding. She will say my nose is bleeding and I can't physically see it. And so then that's when we kind of try to figure out if it truly is, or if she's saying it, which is normal, right? But she will try to communicate, or she'll say, I have a clot in my nose, those types of things. So she does have that terminology that we've tried to teach her, and it's not always accurate because she's a toddler.
Have you thought of kind of therapy for her as she gets a little older and can communicate better, just more as a talk it through preventative type of thing before there are mental health stuff?
Absolutely. As a social worker myself, I'm in tunnel vision of medical trauma and how it impacted her in certain ways. So we have, some services in place, not necessarily therapeutically, but to ensure safety at her daycare and to be part of a team to support her in that way. I've been reaching out to her colleagues and friends about any resources in terms of medical trauma. I'm not distinguishing that she has it, but I know she's been in hospital very often. She's been in situations that have been concerning for her, and a lot of pokes and different things. And so I want her to be able to process that for sure. So I'm absolutely open to, anything that she does end up needing. And I almost don't want to force it on her as a social worker. But also know that it's in my mind, and we try to frame it as best as we can with her.
Is really lucky to have you. He really is. A little girl with GT is lucky to have a mama like you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you speak to her about pretty much everything. Like that's such a big thing. Again, on that mental health thing, the fact that you're a social worker as well and you're so open to it. It's not necessarily something that people think of right away, especially with a child that young. So you mentioned earlier that Mia is slightly sassy. We know this. I know this. I know this because I absolutely loved following along the great journey of can we get Mia to smile for a picture? So tell me more about Mia.
The ball of energy. She is witty. She is crafty. She's upset right now because she just learned how to Houdini out of her bedroom, like without making noise on the monitor. She's been in the hallway. My husband's found her, like when he's looked at the monitor. So we put a child lock, and now she's like, Mama, I don't like that doorknob. She goes, it doesn't work. But I also wouldn't put it past her that she's going to figure out how it works. But no, she's a big personality. Staff at the hospitals could attest to it. Like she'll be in there, blood down her face, all over it, and she'll just be laughing and playing. Like she is so easy going. And even when she had to get, IVs put in, she'd be very upset, naturally. But I always joked, I'm like, she's very forgiving. The same nurse would come in and she'd be like, hi. Welcoming them. She's very demanding about her vitals. So it has to be a certain armpit for her temperature, a certain leg for her blood pressure, and a certain toe for her O2 status. She loves to do vitals. She's very passionate about medical. I try to grasp at the positives of, her being in hospital. She does enjoy medical stuff. So she has a lot of medical kits and she has her own stethoscope and she loves that.
Just give her a few years. She's going to be that sassy kid who the nurse can't find a vein. And she's like, you want me to place the IV?
Now she knows because she has the port, right? So she even says, like, let me put it in. And we have helped her. She'll push her own flush. She'll help to do her own medicine. She wants to do her own niastases when they come around. And she tells them where to connect it. So she's learned a lot.
You have one of the youngest kids in the community right now. So you kind of have that on-hand experience at the moment. What would you say to a parent that just received a diagnosis for their child?
First and foremost, take a deep breath, which I know can be hard. Your child can and very likely will have a fulfilling life. This doesn't define them. It's just a super unique part of who they are. Second tip, do your research. Education about GT is a huge asset, as you may likely need to be an advocate for your child one day. And many times you'll be the expert in the ring, as many medical professionals have no idea how to deal with GT. Third, as much as researching is beneficial, try to remember that no GT cases play out identically. It's best to not compare or project one person's experience onto your own child. It's easy to be fearful of what is to come or expect the worst, but try to remain in the present moment and just take it day by day. And finally, like many life circumstances, there's going to be highs and lows. Hold on tight to those really good times. And in the more challenging times, don't forget to give yourself grace. Reach out to your loved ones for support, as some days can be heavier than others. But you got this. And for the days you feel you don't, we have the GT group.
Hardest times tend to be the most learning experiences. That's when you learn the most. Well, to go through it in the moment is terrifying and it's horrific.
Yeah.
But the knowledge that you gain each time you get through one of these incidents.
Yeah, it's the silver lining of, sometimes admissions, because that's what her team used to say is, at least we're learning more about kind of how her GT is playing out right now, where she's at and what we can do differently. And so you try to take from that.
I think sharing with the community everything that you learn is so important.
And I want to say, this community is very lucky to have you. It has been a very long time since we have had a parent of a small child be as forthcoming and sharing and just really putting it all out there for the group. You are helping a lot of people.
Do it in a sensitive way, because again, I know everyone's experience is so different, and I never want to offend anyone. So sometimes if it's more specific information, I, reach out individually, but I'm more than happy to share in terms of Mia's experience, to help anybody else feel kind of comforted by that.
Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you guys. And it's so nice to meet you all kind of semi in person. Hopefully Fingers crossed in person at the convention.
For those of you who don't know, we will be hosting our first Glanzmann Research Foundation Educational Conference this upcoming July 26th through July 29th in Boston, Massachusetts. You can find out more about the conference on our website at www.curegt.org. If you have GT or you are a family member of someone with GT, you can find our support group on Facebook. You can actually find that through our website as well. And we are currently fundraising and looking for speakers for this conference too. We will be announcing more as we get closer, and we are actively working on just presenting the best possible conference that we can for our community.